governor of New York State and the first African American and legally blind governor. Governor Patterson graduated with a BA in history from Columbia University and then earned his JD degree from Hofstra Law School. He has since dedicated his life to public service, following his father, Basil Patterson. His political career has included positions as Assistant District Attorney and on the staff of Manhattan Borough President David Dinkins, State Senate seat, as well as the Senate Minority Leader. In 2006, Patterson was elected Lieutenant Governor alongside Eliot Spitzer as Governor of New York State. On March 17, 2008, Eliot Spitzer resigned from being governor, making Patterson governor. As governor, Patterson helped guide the states through the recession of 2008 and managed the state's growing budget shortfalls. He left on December 31, 2010. After leaving office, Governor Patterson hosted a radio station for New York station WOR and has taught as an adjunct professor at New York University and Touro College. Governor Patterson recently published his memoir, Black, Blind, and in Charge, this past September 2020. In his memoir, Governor Patterson candidly opens up about his political career, the adversity he has had to face being legally blind, and how he continues to help people through public service. Governor Patterson is an advocate for people who are visually and physically impaired. He also has chaired the board of the Achilles Track Club. For Governor Patterson, he quotes, "I have had the desire my whole life to prove people wrong, to show people that I could do things they didn't think I could do." Can you describe the ocular atrophy that caused you to become legally blind?
So I'm a victim of optic atrophy,
Right.
which is really an eye disease that is lessening and is almost extinct.
Okay.
It was generated by children who prematurely were placed in incubators, and the heat level in the incubators was so high that it was literally burning them. And it burned because the eye is really an open orifice into the to the brain. It burned the nerve between the retina and the optic nerve.
Okay.
And so that scarring prevents the vision from going from the front of my eye to be recorded by the brain. In my left eye, I have no perceptive vision, but I do have slight vision. If I wave my hand over my left eye, I kind of see something moving, but that's about it. So I'm basically totally blind in the left eye. Vision in my right eye is about 20 over 400 at this point. And so I'm probably 20 over 200 is where they define legal blindness. So I have very little sight in my right eye and no sight in my left eye. Now, what's unique is that 5% of the people with optic atrophy did not ever have contact with an incubator, and the catalyst for the disease is unknown, and I'm one of that 5%.
Right. And have you gotten into any of like the research, just as somebody who's, obviously has been affected with this condition?
I think the only research that would ever help me, when I was younger, they said once we perfect the laser, maybe we can burn the scar away. But but what they don't get is that it not only scarred the tissue, it pretty much destroyed it. So,
right.
It's like cutting a phone line. The only thing that would possibly be a cure down the road is stem cell research.
Okay.
Because if you could grow the stem cells to restore the nerve, then my vision would probably be good. I used to joke and say that I was going to leave my eyes to the eye bank and surprise some poor person. But I was informed by my ophthalmologist, if you leave your eyes to the eye bank, they're going to work perfectly in someone else, for someone else. So I'll do it.
Yeah. No, you're still a very, and obviously other people too that are blind, very impressive. You know, having a disability is, you know, you've preached in your book too, or being blind, whatever the case may be, you know, it doesn't define you as a person. So I'm glad that you kept your eyes.
Well, I feel it not only doesn't fully define you as a person, but it does define you as a disabled person, which I don't think people should run away from.
Right.
And you know, so there've been a lot of things that were very painful and very difficult for me because of my blindness. But then there were other situations where I've met people because they stopped me in the street and helped me. I was looking for an address, and the person that helped me find the place became a friend. You know, you don't. It's an interesting way to meet people, and also. When I was in government, and even now, I go to schools and I speak to the students. And when I was a kid, and I'm sure you felt this way, Alexander, that when these people came in to speak to you in school, they always seemed so perfect. Well, the first thing they knew, just watching me try to get on the stage, is that I wasn't perfect. And that creates a different communication between the student and yourself, because this is someone the student can relate to more, because they're imperfect, and every student knows that they are too.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, we're all imperfect to nth degree, regardless of, you know, a disability or not. I mean, life's not perfect. So, so you mentioned how you obviously have some vision, clearly, in terms of just seeing light perception and all of that. So can you describe, I guess, in simple terms or the best you can, what can you see? The outlines of, you know.
So for instance, right now, I can see you on the screen. You have dark hair. It's long. I couldn't draw your picture. You know, I can see where your eyes are, but it's not blurred. It's just too far away. And behind you, there is a picture. I can't see what it's a picture of, but I can see the frame and the white awning around it. And so I would say that sitting in a room, I probably can see things, you know, 10 to 12 feet away. And when you have the kind of vision I have, a lot of your vision is interpretive. So for instance, when I'm in a taxi and I'm riding home, there's a building next to our building that's really, really tall. When I see the really tall building, I know I'm approaching home. Now, I might see another tall building 3 blocks away and think that that's home. That's happened from time to time. But the other problem I have is not just the extreme nearsightedness. It's that I basically can't use both eyes. So my vision is two-dimensional rather than three-dimensional.
Right.
So sometimes I have trouble descending stairways because, you know, the stairs are away from you. There's a depth. And that's a real problem for me. I tested eligible to have a seeing eye dog or a white cane. I never used them as a younger person. My mother really trained me, and at the industrial home for the blind where I used to go, they really trained me well, even though I was not the most helpful client there all the time. You know, I went to public school, and this is where I think I got myself in trouble. I wanted people to believe that I wasn't blind, but I am. And the reason I would do that is the more I did not complain, the better reception I got from my teachers. When there were times I should have stood up for myself and demanded, say, for instance, if the teacher drew an equation on the blackboard in math, that they maybe could have drawn it on a piece of paper and handed it to me so I could see it with my glasses. And I just wasn't an advocate for myself in those days. But my vision confuses people because there are things I can do that absolutely shock people. And then there are things that I can't do that probably make people who know me shake their heads. because of the combination of the nearsightedness and the lack of depth perception.
Right. So what is something that you can do that would shock somebody?
I could go down to a park and get in just about any 3-on-3 basketball game, and I could hold my own. And it just mystifies people how I'm able to do that. And led to a really fun experience I had many years ago that I write about in the book, when I went and played in this basketball game in some tournaments that were held in the gay and lesbian and LGBT community. And I played and I made a shot while falling down in that game that they would have showed on television. But when we all went home that night, that's the night many, many years ago that O.J. Simpson drove up the highway and it wiped everything else off TV, which is why I'm glad they finally threw him in jail, because I was really annoyed by that.
I'm sure. No, I'm with you on that. So from reading your book, it's my understanding that you were unaware of your vision difficulties until you were about 5. So was it when you were a toddler you were able to see better, or did you think that everyone saw the same way that you did, regardless of whether they had vision impairments or not?
I think I saw that everyone seemed to see things that I didn't. And then I had 2 friends that I lived on the block with me. And I always noticed that when we got to a corner, they would put their hand out to the side to stop me from walking into the street. And then they would tell me when to walk and when not to. So I guess I figured out they were seeing things that I didn't see, but I didn't see it as a problem. Now, when I got to school and you start getting called nearsighted, cockeyed, and all these things that would say about me, then I would feel degraded.
Right. So it might surprise people, but you did not learn Braille as a child. So what was the reasoning behind that? And have you since ever attempted to learn Braille? I mean, it's my understanding you don't know Braille still as an adult. So can you tell us about that?
The people who ran the facility at the Industrial Home for the Blind and the people who advised my parents told them in 1960, 1961, just as I'm learning how to read, that Braille, the use of Braille is going to be obsolete. They're going to use records and then eventually tapes to record. What they didn't understand is that there's something about Braille that is very similar to the mechanism of the eye when someone reads. No one really knows how we read. It mystifies people who teach reading, but we all seem to learn how to read. Comprehension from Braille is very similar to the comprehension of a person reading a book. But if you listen to a book, like on audio tape, your comprehension is somewhere between 50 and 60%. So listening just does not evoke the brain's comprehension as well as either reading with your eyes or Braille. So that was a huge mistake. And I would pay for it years later when as I mentioned in the book, I gave a State of the State address, which I memorized. It was 63 minutes, but it took me a week to memorize it. And during that week, there were errors in judgment that were made by my staff that I would have corrected about the appointment of a senator to the US Senate. And that would be my biggest political debacle, which was my fault, but it was in many ways catapulted by the fact that I had been spending that time trying to get the speech right to deliver it on the State of the State address day.
Yeah, no, and I remember that book very clearly, and I was going to ask. So one of your techniques is clearly to memorize speeches, or clearly at that time, which I relate to because my mom can attest. I'm very good at memorizing, but it takes a lot of time, and I commend you very well, and it can be frustrating at times. But what was that process like? You had mentioned that for the speech, it took you a week to memorize it, and there were still obviously little flaws, as you had mentioned. in terms of other people wanting to change things around and so forth. But so what's that process like? 'Cause it must be really difficult, you know, it's long and enduring.
Well, for instance, the first day that I'm governor, about 3 hours before I'm going to give my inauguration speech, we learn that Bear Stearns was saved by the federal government the night before, and there would be a huge economic impact of Bear Stearns' value being something like $2 a share.
Mm-hmm.
And Bear Stearns is one of the major companies. And they wrote 2 extra paragraphs into my speech, and trying to memorize them around between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning, I came down with a pretty bad headache because I think it was just my own frustration at having to do it and my own fear that I wouldn't be able to memorize it. Fortunately, by 1 o'clock when I was sworn in, I was able to. But, you know, the stress of all the memorization, I once gave 17 presentations in 38 hours, I counted. You know, one very busy period when I was governor. And I think it physically and emotionally wore me down after a while.
When it comes to going back a little bit to your childhood and being bullied by, you know, kids your own age, and also like people that, you know, were unaware of, you know, what, you know, your disability or being blind was. I know you had mentioned at one point that there was a little bit of like a bullying, or just, I don't mean by bullying, but I just mean, you know, somebody just didn't, you know, they didn't understand and they were a special education teacher, if I remember correctly. But with all of that, there clearly was a lack of knowledge on disabilities and, you know, discrimination and rights. And so how would you, as a child, describe what was the knowledge of, you know, somebody having a disability? Clearly has changed. But.
I think that particularly for the blind,
Right.
the blind were sort of the favorite disability of charities.
Okay.
And the person who made it that way was Helen Keller, who was both blind and deaf, and had speaking disability, speaking issues that she wasn't able to overcome. It was the one thing they thought she would get better at, but she never actually did. And of course, she was a tremendous fighter for blind causes, but Helen Keller's parents forbid her to marry, which just because somebody's blind doesn't mean that they couldn't be married and have a career and be in love. And I remember reading that as a younger person, that I felt singled out that way because I was probably always one of the most popular kids in the class. And then when we got to the social part of the calendar in 7th and 8th grade and people had parties, I wasn't invited. And I guess I felt that, you know, there was this sort of divide that people who are disabled are not part of the regular social themes and social activities that teenagers go through. And so it was, you know, I think the view of people with disabilities is that we should be charitable to them, we should take care of them, and we should help them. And I know that you can become dependent on that help. And I was fighting very much for my own independence. One story that I did not put in the book, now I wish I had, was when I was 14, I was a freshman in high school. My parents sent me to an independent living skills program for the blind in Queens, and I was living in Long Island. And I hated this program. The blind people there, to me, were all going to blindness schools. They had no real ability to travel or do much independently. And I didn't know why I had to be in this little class with them on Saturdays. And I lied to my friends who wanted to get together on Saturdays about where I was for a few weeks. And finally, one of the, you know, days there bothered me so much that I came home and I remembered that I had my brother had bet me $5 that I couldn't jump out of the bathroom window, which was on the second floor. And I lost the bet. I just paid him the $5 because I was afraid to jump. I walked into the house, went right up to the second floor, pulled the screen of the window out, jumped out the window, but forgot there was a little ledge under the window. So if you're going to jump out of it, you jump past it and then come down. And I got flipped upside down, and in trying to break my fall, I broke my wrist. So, that's how the disability manifests what I call ancillary disability, which is where you're now disabling yourself as much as human nature did. Mm-hmm. And something that you have to really avoid, because some of the things that happen are frustrating, but at the same time, your creativity and your ability, whatever limits it may have, you can find ways to be effective and to be successful, even without all of your natural physical skills and even mental skills.
Absolutely, I'm with you on that. So how, and I guess you can describe a little bit, but the tools and strategies that you have used as a child, how have they changed over time? There's been obviously a lot of change over the years. But anyways, how have, the different things,
well, we have definitely assimilated more disabled people into public education. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important because, as you read in the book, my mother said to me, when I asked her why I didn't go to one of those blind schools, she said, whoever you go to school with is going to be who you socialize with and inevitably who you do business with. And there's nothing wrong with these schools, because the performance of blind people in the education field is 3% higher than the national average. So blind people really have mastered the educational system. What we have not been able to do is to master the employment situation, as 60% of blind people in this country are still unemployed, which is, if that happened to any other group, it would be a national issue to address. I think that the technology some of it has been great, but then you have these digital divides for blind people, such as in 2015, a company called Audio Eye actually created access onto the Social Security website for blind people. It also was able to access the voter registration website. Some of the federal websites are still not accessible to the blind. Some of the companies that take into account that someone blind is coming to the website, or even other disabilities, will code the website to accept that you're blind as soon as your equipment goes on the site, and will then report back to you in ways that you can either hear it or can say, for some people with epilepsy, a lot of different colors on the screen can bother them, and these new technologies can code that right out. So there's a lot of positive work that's been done, but at the same time, the Kindle will read a book to you. There's only one problem: you have to see to be able to turn it on. So if you want to stop and go back a couple of pages and that kind of thing, a blind person couldn't do it on the Kindle, which is why I went to the state of Washington, to Seattle, to picket the Kindle offices along with the National Federation of the Blind in 2012, because it's ridiculous to have audio and there isn't an audio way to access it. And it would be a small change that they would have to make in their technology to accommodate the blind. And this happens to people with other disabilities as well, is that these companies could care less. And then they give a check to a dinner for a blindness organization and think they can go home and that buys them a ticket into heaven. It does not.
I'm with you on a lot of all different levels, but I think, it's real, and I mean, the whole Kindle, and it's funny, you'll find this very funny, but I actually was a little bit concerned that I wasn't going to have enough time to read your book. And now I read books for academic purposes. Literally, I underline, I take notes and so forth. And it was, well, yes, it actually was a Kindle. But I was like, well, if I don't have the time to actually physically get it, because I ordered it from your publisher, I was thinking, well, I'm just going to go and get a Kindle. Now I can get a Kindle and read, for pleasure, fun books, whatever on there. So I got it, and fortunately I was able to get the book, and obviously I have the time to finish it and so forth. But I was like, this is crazy. This is really what a Kindle is. They should have all these functions, especially, they don't think about, obviously audio for someone like yourself who's blind. And I don't think not everyone understands, and it's hard unless you're affected with a condition, or you're a professional. A lot of people don't understand what it's like. And
No, that is certainly true. And in addition to not understanding what it's like, they are not attuned to the fact that
right.
What they're doing is they are limiting the progress of people who could maybe change the world if they just had the right apparatus.
Absolutely.
So you never know who's the person that's going to discover the cure for cancer. And
right.
the problem is they
cure
can't.
For blindness.
Exactly.
Oh. Well, we're all on that. We're got to cure blindness, brain injuries, all different disorders.
By the way, I'll tell you something, Alexandra, since you do have the foundation that you may not be aware of, something I've fought for and never really got anywhere, is in 1938, that was the year that they passed the Fair Labor Standards Act in the country. And that's what created the minimum wage. Now, the blindness organizations wanted blind people to be working. So they were willing for blind people at the time to accept 75% of whatever minimum wage was in 1938. That number was dropped to 50% in 1950 and dropped to zero in the early 60s. So you have these workshops where blind people go and work, and they make, sometimes 30 cents on the dollar of what other people would make. And they have these companies that employ the blind, and for families of people who don't, think about the value of the work of their family members who are blind, but they love that they can go to these places, they make friends there, and they work all day, and then they come home. And there was a story of a woman who, after 2 weeks of her first job, she wanted to take her family out to dinner, but her pay was $25 for the 2 weeks. And companies have made a lot of money off of these people. And we have always wanted the government to change what they call the sub-minimum wage. It's the minimum wage that doesn't exist for blind people and people with mental illness. And a lot of people are making a lot of money off of their work, and nobody wants to stop it. And the industry's got so mad at me for talking about it when I had a radio show on WOR 7 or 8 years ago, that they offered WOR a huge advertising contract if I read their advertisement, which I refused to do. And, the station fortunately supported me.
Right. So we're actually, talking about unemployment for those obviously that are blind. You said it's about 60%. Where are we in, advancing that?
Well, sometimes there is, under the Social Security Administration, you could get on SSI and you're blind. But then if you get a job, they don't let you collect the SSI anymore. But there is certainly a theory that the SSI is paying for things that a blind person would have to pay for that a sighted person would not. And that now getting a job, they would actually have a livable wage. And so what the blind people wind up doing is just not working because it takes away their SSI benefits. I've always thought there was a way to negotiate that out because, you know, we have earned income tax credits. We have ways to pay people and have them work at the same time. And I think work is really the dream of every blind person. Turned down a few times for jobs because of my blindness. When I finally got a job, I mean, I didn't love school, so any reason to not go was always a good reason as far as I was concerned.
You went on to law school, so for someone that didn't like school, you did very, very well.
Yeah, but when I got my first job, I went 2 years and didn't miss a day. And because that's how much it meant to me, knowing that when I was 20 or 21, I wondered if I would ever work. And for that person who's living that depression to actually go on and become the governor of the state of New York, it happened to me, and even I don't believe it.
It's absolutely, I mean, it's incredible. And, you know, fortunately you weren't in that, you know, situation where, you know, there was no, you know, you weren't able to get employed. Talking about unemployment and just people with disabilities, you know, having, you know, rights and so forth. What do you believe, or what do you think about the Americans with Disabilities Act that clearly does not, doesn't extend to, you know, employment settings necessarily, but, you know, and then also like about, you know, inclusivity and accessibility right now to date in this world?
So the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1990, I think the first iteration was to make buildings accessible for the disabled. So ramps and elevators that tell you what floor you're on, or even have Braille over the buttons that you push, signs for people who are hearing impaired. It's amazing how the real estate industry and the construction industry converted to doing it the right way in a relatively short period of time. By 2000, you couldn't really build a building in this country without making it ADA compliant. And so kudos to those who, you know, really pushed for goals and timetables that we could reach in that regard. Now, what happened, I'd say in toward the end of the last century and into the new millennium, were the tremendous conversion to online, to the electronic internet, to access to broadband. And in that regard, the blind were left behind. So the companies that were advertising, the links, everything, you had to see to get to it. And it pushed many of us back into the Stone Age because we couldn't get on a computer, and there's no way I could read off of a computer. And, you know, even now, somebody emailed something and it went somewhere in my phone. It's almost impossible for me to read and actually find it. And again, I'm caught between, if I was totally blind, probably everything on the phone would be automated, but I'm not, so I can see a little. And so I get caught in the middle of that sort of issue where I'm not totally blind, but I'm also not sighted enough to really be of assistance. So the real push now is to bring that kind of change to the internet and close that digital divide. And it's still taking a while to get companies to be compliant. But the good news is the largest 3 lawsuits that are instituted in this country right now are over stock transactions over private equity cases, and the third is failure to be compliant with the American Disabilities Act of July 26, 1990. So people are rising up and they're lawyering up and they're going after these companies that figure, oh, whatever it is, if there's a fine, I'll pay it. Now they're finding themselves sitting in court, losing a lot of money because they have not adjusted to a large population. And the thing about it, Alexander, that just irks me is these companies don't even realize how much money they're losing because the blind can't access them. So for instance, a mortgage company in Arizona, just recently, this statistic came out, raised their profit margin by 8.5% just by making their work and their access available to disabled people. So to me, that's the American story. Our country, time and time again, has shot ourselves in the foot by making it difficult for people to be able to get an equal opportunity in housing, or education, or employment.
I've dealt with these issues my entire life. It's unfortunate that they are singling out the blind, which is, one group. I mean, and, we need accessibility for all, regardless of what it is. You shouldn't be singling out. That's discrimination by.
Yeah. When I was talking about the mortgage company, you see, there are a lot of disabilities that impair people from using the access to the broadband for these companies.
Of course.
And yet there are some companies that can come in and in a sense upgrade their technology to accommodate it, and it makes money for them. This is a money-making deal for them.
I don't want to do it.
They act like, oh, we have to spend all this money to change our website and that kind of thing for these people. They see it as some sort of, charity. No, they're going to be the inevitable beneficiaries of it when they look at their bottom line at the end of the year.
Right. And, hopefully that does change. I mean, if you're going to work, and that's probably one of maybe the issues with unemployment. I mean, clearly one of the issues, but I would hope that they would come to their quote unquote senses. So we'll get a little bit into your career as governor. So you were sworn in after Eliot Spitzer had resigned due to a scandal in 2008. I still remember to this day you signing documents and watching you on TV, and it was always an enjoyment for me to watch you sign.
Oh, thank you.
Given your difficulties and so forth. I had just graduated high school at that point. But so in office, obviously you were, not obviously, but you were lieutenant governor, prior, and obviously when, all of everything with Eliot Spitzer had happened. How did they work around you and, having, being blind? Because technically you were, you're one of the first. They've never really had to deal with somebody that has a disability or, a vision impairment.
Well, it was interesting. My blindness was always kind of a positive when I was going through it, when I went into government, except that when I was first running for office, one of my opponent's supporters was calling up all these people telling them he's blind, what he's going to do when he gets to Albany. He's disabled. He won't be able to represent this district. And I took major issue with that. And I think that was the only time that it, ever seemed to be a negative. People genuinely applauded my efforts. I was a Democrat in the Senate and we were in the minority. So the majority, the Republicans, had all the money, but they had me come in and ask me where I needed extra help, and they gave me extra money that they didn't have to give me so that I could have more staff to help me prepare and do things. I was doing fine until I became governor. And this is something that when I was working with the National Federation of the Blind, they talk about, where people will help you if they think you need help, as long as you're not in the decision-making capacity. So once I became governor, all of a sudden, there are these little quips, and one of my staff members had not paid their income taxes and had to resign. And he was my secretary, who was the highest staff member. So the New York Post writes an editorial called "The Governor's Eyes," saying that now my ability to govern is impaired because he can't read to me anymore. There were 200,000 people on the state payroll. As far as I know, all of them could read to me, but they actually went and wrote it. And on another occasion, I made this comment about the frustration that New Yorkers had that they hadn't rebuilt at the World Trade Center. 7 years had passed since the tragic attack on our country. And I said, look, we have already gotten a committee. We've already figured out what we're going to do. We will be building at the World Trade Center. Next thing you know, they write an article, also happened to be in the New York Post, that the governor, they should take him down to the World Trade Center and let him touch the new buildings that are already going up, because he doesn't seem to know that they've already started rebuilding. I knew that, but it wasn't significant enough for anyone to notice it. So that's why I said, we'll be rebuilding. But everything seemed to relate back to my sight problems. And then I had a 64% approval rating. And on Saturday Night Live on December 6, 2008, they do this skit where they make me a Mr. Magoo bumbling fool who bumps into things and pulls maps upside down and just totally humiliated me. And everybody thinks it's funny. And I didn't think it was, what?
I said it's not.
It's not. And even my own press corps drafted a press release. Ha, 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 Saturday Night Live, very funny. Now let's let the governor come on and speak for himself. And I said, I don't want to go on that show. And I used the Saturday Night Live incident as a pillar to talk about disability and how, even though it was funny, deep in the minds of people, they think that disabled people are really like that. And they thought I was a governor like that. Right. Although, Alexandra, I did hold a map up once upside down.
That's okay. We all make mistakes.
Right. But the point was that, it started to become an issue where I started to feel the way I felt when I was made fun of on the playground when I was a little kid, because everything related back to my eyesight. Mm-hmm. There was a situation where we were appointing someone as a new judge of the New York State Court of Appeals, and his wife collapsed at the ceremony. Now, I was standing closest to her, but I was standing 7 feet away from her. And they asked me if I saw her fall. I said, I did realize that she fell when she hit the ground, and I looked and she was there. And they said, well, it's too bad you didn't have better vision. You could have gone over there and caught her. They wouldn't have said that to anybody else. There were other people standing closer to her. They didn't say that to them. So it's this kind of, finally in 2010, I have a dear friend named Jeff Green, and he knew the people from Saturday Night Live. And he said to me, David, you fought a good fight. Go on Saturday Night Live and do to them what they did to you. And I did. And I got even with them. And I told them, you all made so much fun of me for being blind, but I forgot I was black. So
go for it. I think, that's
so, although you have to protest and that kind of thing, sometimes you win a little by just dishing it back to them. And I really let them have it.
Of course. Well, I'm like you. I love to dish people back. And my mom thinks I'm too tough sometimes. That's her way. But I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have it any other way. My dad does too, but my mom specifically.
I'm glad.
Yeah. No, it's important. So we haven't spoken about, but I mean specifically, but what are you doing right now, and I guess your work through the years as an advocate for those with disabilities? And
So, believe it or not, I'm a senior vice president of the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, and I'm not one who really likes gambling, but they want to win a license in New York, and I want to make sure that the procurement from that company, when it comes into New York, honors the commitment to have viable women-owned and minority-owned businesses, and also that they recognize that New York is not Las Vegas, and will support the causes that New Yorkers support. So that's been great. I consult for a lobbying firm known as Kivett. I teach at Toro College, which has branches all around the country, but started right here in New York. And I was going to work with a company that does build new types of technology that accommodates the disabled, but we couldn't work out the terms. So, but I really enjoy the advocacy, because when I was younger, and it's very interesting, the African American causes, I was all involved in them because I wasn't alone. But the disability causes, particularly since I was not going to school with other disabled people, I tended to shy away from. And that kind of caught up with me at one point in my life, and I realized that I didn't even know that I was doing it. But so then I got really into the ADA lobbying to get that bill passed, and have been a fierce advocate ever since. I think when I was younger, I felt better when I was in a group, but now, you know, years later, I learned how to advocate. If I was the only one in the room, I would do it, and really didn't care if anyone agreed with me.
and that's how you should go. You know, whether people, you know, agree or disagree, or even, you know, get mad at you. Well, that's, you know, that's their loss, quote unquote. So you do a lot of this advocacy work. Is there anything specifically now that you kind of want to accomplish in X number of years, or government
Well,
accomplish?
we've tried over and over, and we've never been able to eliminate the sub-minimum wage situation that exists in this country. And we really thought we were making some progress about 7 or 8 years ago, but it just didn't work. And even Tom Harkin, who was the big disability advocate in the United States Senate, wasn't with us. So that was hurtful. In recent years, I've moved over to the accessibility of information on websites, because so many blind people just don't have that ability to do that right now.
What advice would you give to, you know, others? I mean, others that maybe want to go, I mean, clearly if they want to go into politics, or, you know, do something with, you know, law and disabilities and, you know, fighting, but just people who have, you know, vision and other types of impairments.
Well, I wrote about this in my book, and then when I read it back, I was really proud that I've grown to a point where I actually feel this way, that you have to be, you know, people love their families, and they're proud of their heritage, and they're proud of their religion, and they're proud of everything else. But when they have a disability, it's almost like people want to apologize for the fact that you have it. Like, you know, he's blind, but he's a really smart guy. You should meet him. But why is there a but there?
Right.
And the point is that the lack of physical capacity and sometimes mental capacity does not mean that there isn't a human being there who really would do a lot better if they were a lot prouder of themselves. And so I think that when I was younger, and, you know, I had that incident where I jumped out the window, I was trying to dissociate myself from who I was. I am blind. you know, and it's, it's pretty obvious to people. And so I've really tried to, over the years, to embrace that and to, you know, think sometimes when I couldn't find a phone number in my phone, and it just didn't seem to be any way to fix it, to get it. And I was getting frustrated the other day. Then I thought, well, these are just the problems. These are the cards you were dealt. So just play them,
Right.
And right now I have a bad hand, but there's so many other times where I think I've been able to make a difference for other people who had the same afflictions that I have, and to empower them. There was a class I went to after high school and before college at Syracuse University. So I spent the summer there before going to college, and they were teaching us independent skills, and they were teaching us how to use the library, which when you're blind, they can't really teach you how to use the library. And nobody ever really admits that, but it's true. And when I became governor, and I went back to Syracuse, I asked people about that program, and they got rid of it. So I decided to put it back.
Good for you.
And so, it's, I think my advice to people is that the second disability is the one you can control, and it's losing your self-esteem, not believing that you can achieve, feeling that the world is against you, feeling that everyone is discriminating against you when only some people are, and being proud of who you are, and fight for your own rights. And when you get resistance, fight even harder, and don't worry about the outcome, because it's really the fight that makes you a great person and brings you to a place where now, just as you love your family and you love your heritage and you love where you grew up, you also love yourself.
I think that's beautiful advice. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This was lovely.
Well, thank you.